interviewing Australian firms who've moved to a 4-day week since the beginning of 2023. So for 2 years now, we've been conducting those interviews. And look, there's certainly a lot of pros for it. So these companies have gone into it with lots of different reasons. So it may be productivity, but usually it's more around things like recruitment, staff retention, even addressing rising concerns like burnout as well. So there's certainly a lot of positives. I'm not saying it's for every firm, but certainly the ones that we've spoken to, it's had lots of success for them.
Yeah, because I'm wondering, what about the arguments against it? You mentioned the issue there of fatigue and burnout, but I've read some arguments against the 4-day working week that say, well, hang on a minute, compressing your hours into 4 days, that could actually make fatigue and burnout worse.
Yeah, look, that's a very good point. And it's probably important to mention that the firms that we have been interviewing, they haven't adopted that 4-day week. They haven't adopted the compressed week. What they've adopted is a new model of 4-day week called the 100-80-100 model. And what that is, it's 4 standard days. So it's actually not only a reduction in days, but a reduction in hours as well. So rather than working those, let's say, 4 10-hour days, compressing a 5-day week into a 4-day week, it's 4 standard days instead.
You mentioned their productivity, and that's interesting in terms of how you measure productivity, right? I mean, it depends on the industry, because I'm thinking in retail, for example, if you compress your number of hours to a 4-day week, by definition, you're serving fewer customers. So that means less productivity. It would be very, very dependent on the industry.
Oh, yeah. And not just the industry, but even the role type within the industry. So every role is going to be different. It's not necessarily going to work as well in some roles than others. And retail is a really good example because you can't just be really good at retail for 4 days a week and make up for what you've missed on the 5th day, because obviously there's still going to be customers coming in. So in those roles where presence is required, another good example would be, let's say, a security guard. You can't be really good at security, doing 25% extra work for 4 days and then skip a day. Physically, somebody has to be there. And in instances like that, so for those types of roles, there's going to be a cost incurred to cover the fact that that person isn't going to be working that shift.
So back to that sense of optimism some viewers might be feeling listening to this. We're seeing that momentum in the UK, but what's your feeling researching it here? I mean, are we seeing a similar similar progress here in Australia? Some companies at least willing to test out going down that same path?
Look, it's definitely growing for sure. Like I said, we've interviewed 20 companies already, and the number are growing each year. I wouldn't say we've had that big insurgence of 200 companies like they've experienced in the UK. But of course, the more that companies do it and the more we talk about it, the more that it's on the radar of other companies, are more likely that others are going to try it.
Why do you think some companies might be reluctant to go down that path?
It's interesting in that when we asked what the biggest obstacles or challenges were for companies moving to a 4-day week, they said skepticism. They said that a lot of people simply couldn't see how you could do 5 days worth of work in 4 days. So overcoming that skepticism is certainly a big challenge. Other challenges that we encountered as well were things like what to do when there's a public holiday in the week, or what to do with part-time workers. And each of the companies we've spoken to have had their different solutions to each of those problems.
Yeah, it could create a bit of a headache for people doing the rosters. You know, some proponents of the situation in the UK say, you know, the 5-day working week, it's a relic from an earlier economic age. It's no longer fit for purpose. It is really in need of an update. I mean, broadly speaking, and as you said there, it depends on the industry, but broadly speaking, is that your view? It's a bit of a relic from an earlier age?
Next year, it will be 100 years since Henry Ford moved the Ford workers in the US from 6 days down to 5 days. So we've had this 5-day, 40-hour working week for a century now. And back then, it was predominantly only males within the household were working, so predominantly there was only one breadwinner. And the average life expectancy of workers in the US back then was 51. So we really have moved on a lot since then. We've had a lot of new technologies that can help us save time and should be saving time in our working day. But the reality of it is what these technologies have done is they've actually made our working days and working weeks longer. We're working around 5 hours a week extra on top of our standard paid hours. And that works out to around 280 hours a year. Additionally, just those, quick emails before work, after work, weekend, when we're on holiday, things like that.